Yo, gloves are still wet from yesterday. Today it's sunny. Gonna go get myself a coffee. I tried to put this here. Seems to work pretty well. I'm gonna attach this to my helmet and then go grab a coffee. I'm just gonna get some fuel. You can hear my shocking tyre in a sec. Dem tang?
เอาเต็มถังนะคะ
Yeah. So I'm just going to go for a little afternoon blast. I'm currently living off the proceeds of Claude. In the last 6 months, it's become more of a paradigm shift that we use LLMs with certain harnesses to be able to orchestrate different types of work beyond coding. And the products from Anthropic and OpenAI have changed around admin work and being able to do work that isn't just code. This is quite an interesting shift because I was talking about this 4 or 5 months ago where I was using Cursor. Cursor was primarily for coding, but I was actually interested in using it for admin work, and I was calling it Vibe Admin. The main premise was the fact that when you were doing coding work, a lot of the specs were written in Markdown. The program was using an LLM to be able to interact with files, and I was like, this would be quite good just for keeping notes. And this was around the time when Obsidian was becoming more popular with Claude Code, and Obsidian with Claude Code is like an OP stack. Having an LLM that can interact with your files and do meaningful tasks is good. You know, some of the primitive ways which we were using ChatGPT kind of looked like, okay, I need a script to do this thing, copy and paste it into terminal or make it into a file and then run it. An LLM that can interact with your files like Cursor was, and now Codex and Claude Code. Now it can do all of the steps, right? It can interact with files, it can write files, read files. It has CRUD access, so it can do shit with your files. It can then run the file, it can check the output, it can see if what it did worked. You're not copy and pasting stuff, because it always felt stupid. It's like, why am I copy and pasting this? Why aren't you doing this? How do I make you do this? And this is now what ChatGPT is becoming. I haven't actually tried this out, but I've seen a lot of the updates with Codex, and apparently it's really good for computer use. Claude came out with this not too long ago, but OpenAI acquired a company called Sky, which was apparently making exactly this about 6 months ago or something. We're at a stage where the LLMs are going to use the computer, and apparently with the OpenAI one, it doesn't even hijack your mouse and keyboard. It can actually do stuff with like wizard level interaction with the operating system rather than crudely interacting with Windows and like hijacking the focus when you're trying to do stuff. It can actually do shit. And the fact that it can do stuff and it doesn't need to hijack what you're doing kind of means that it can do things in parallel, right? It could do one thing in one window, one thing in another window. So the way that we're going to end up using these tools over the next couple of years, it's just going to change so much. Even when I've told people about this and then they start using Claude Cowork, right? Because Claude Cowork is basically a more simple interface than Claude Code, but it is essentially the same thing. They just end up with a load of Claude projects, with each project having its own context, and then there's like not really any connection between the things. They've got no tools, no knowledge base, no Claude MD. And it's just like, you are the thing that's holding that system together. Just because you know roughly what chat equates to what. And that was the frustration I had with ChatGPT, and why I realized that Cursor, with a couple of knowledge base, if you can call it that, because you could, tell it what you wanted it to do, then you basically could refine that system to be able to interact with information that you gave it. Okay, that is when it became really useful. That kind of developed into Claude skills. And now, for example, I have a Claude skill that interacts with Google Maps, but it uses the Google Places API, so it can get the reviews. I think Google directions or maps as a separate API, but it can basically get the directions for different vehicle types. If I want to cycle somewhere, or I want to walk somewhere, or I want to say, okay, I want to walk somewhere, how long does it take to get there? And it can do all of that. So a skill is essentially a workflow, something which it repeats, or it's the steps of how to do something. And over time, these different primitives got combined into situations we have today, where you've got Claude Code with Obsidian. It can read and write the files, but they're structured. So it's creating a structured knowledge base that Claude can interact with, that a human can read easily. And now, you can do stuff like have a CRM attached to it, get daily briefings. One of the main ways I use mine is a journal in Obsidian. Claude Code can run a daily reflection, which is basically an analysis on the journal entry. When I mention people, I have a people directory. It's the person's name as a markdown file. And then it has a couple of properties. How do I know this person? How long have I known them? What's the relationship? And then it's just like, if I mention someone or I want to ask questions about, what should I do about this? It has context about who that person is, who they are to me. And then the LLM becomes smarter because it has more information, and there's good ways that we can feed the information to Claude without completely bloating its context window. There's a concept called progressive disclosure, which is similar to, it is what skills do. So a skill can be invoked either by calling it exactly, I want you to use this with like a slash command, /reflect or analyze, for example. Or if I'm just mentioning a particular file, or it's working on a particular file, or I'm just mentioning, hey, can you analyze this and just tell me what you think about this? And then it can then find the skill. It can then find, essentially, it doesn't need to bloat the context until it realizes that you actually want to do something specific. Then it can gather the rest of the information from that skill. What I realized recently, I wanted to put my CRM in Obsidian because it was essentially in my head. I wanted to be able to look at what's in the pipeline, who's paying what, who do I need to contact, who have I told something to that I need to follow up with. I basically got the information out of my head and into a structure which Claude could interact with. And what I realized is that I then had quite a lot of different areas in my Obsidian vault, and then my Claude MD, which is root level instructions to Claude, is something which goes into every prompt. Every time you send a message to it, it reads this Claude MD. What I realized is that you can actually have a Claude MD in every directory. So for example, there's a directory level Claude MD and a root level Claude MD. So they can progressively disclose more information depending on what Claude needs to interact with. This massively prevents context bloat, which is important if you want high quality results. Before I left England, I gave up my flat, I sold all my stuff, and I wanted to join a co-working space. And me and my friend were meeting up in Richmond before he went traveling. I ended up in Richmond, and I was like, I don't really want to work in my mate's dad's house. He already didn't charge me any rent, and I just didn't want to be in the way. And I liked Richmond. It's a nice place to walk around. Put myself into a co-working space in Richmond for just under a month, and it became really good. I really enjoyed it. I made loads of progress. I met people. It was a good experience. I started doing a lot of work which was more like admin work rather than coding, but I was so familiar with Claude Code being like my single point of contact for all of my work. I started to shape my work, and I started forcing Claude to do work that I had not really tried to get it to do before. For example, making a client report and then using the communication preference, which is really like how technical someone was who was a client, and then looking at Google Analytics and the stats for their ads, but then framing the report at a technical level that they could understand. Because the one which I need to be able to improve the CRO on a website is way more technical than what the client cares about. And that seems like a very common thing, but What about if you want Claude to just handle all of that? And this is where the pattern is essentially, you get Claude to do it, and then you get Claude to codify it into a skill. You do it, you see it working, you turn it into a skill, then you're now like maintaining skills. But the good thing is that Claude can do that itself, and that's quite nice. But it just becomes a pattern of how to use it. Around the making money stuff, ended up chatting to this guy. He basically said to me that he was a UI designer, trying to learn JavaScript or Python to vibe code websites. And I was kind of like, but why? Why don't you learn how to use it for the thing that you already know how to do? This is the power. The power is not, I'm going to use it to do this completely unrelated thing that I don't really know how to do or how to measure success for. Okay, I'm going to use it for the thing I already know so that I can tell whether it's done a good job or not. Now you're learning a tool and you're learning a different field. And I think that he couldn't really see where his strengths were, because I actually thought that his work was good, and I kind of saw it as pointless that he was trying to use code to do something that he didn't know how to do, and then trying to use AI as another abstraction layer to do that. It just didn't really make sense to me. So yeah, I chatted to this guy. We actually spoke for about 2 or 3 hours. Anyway, he kind of knew the people that worked at the co-working space and the manager, and he just suggested that I join in their talk, which was actually like 3 days later. It was about AI, and there's a couple of elements to this, because I'd not really done this before. I'd never joined. I would have always said that I was no good at public speaking and that I was shy. Spoke to the manager, and he wanted me to join one other person to sort of lead this discussion. And I thought, okay, I'll prepare something for that, and I'll show what I now describe as like the levels of AI use. I realized that I was doing that thing again where I overplan, I overthink, I worry myself, and I thought, do you know what? I can talk about AI shit all day. Any questions they ask me, I've got either an answer for it or I just don't know. What am I preparing exactly? So I thought, okay, I'm not even going to prepare anything. I'm just going to go into this conversation and see what happens. So it came to the Friday lunchtime, 12 o'clock, it was the talk, and the guy who I was with, the other gent that was kind of leading this discussion, answering people's questions and stuff like that, he had a degree in cybersecurity or something, and he was doing stuff with AI for the London Stock Exchange, and on a different end of the spectrum than I was, basically. He was a scholar, let's say, and I was more like an operator. So we had a good dynamic there. He was kind of talking about AI safety and regulations, and I feel like this AI safety stuff is kind of bullshit. It's like a regulatory capture move from companies like Anthropic to be able to introduce so much regulation that no one can compete with them. They design the regulation, they lobby for certain things, and then they benefit from that being in place. I don't genuinely believe that they want safety. That kind of came up. That was just my take on it. But another thing that came up was around, isn't this all AI using copyrighted material? Like, should we be using this? And I'm thinking, my approach to using AI is like, how do I use this to interact with tools so that I can use it to make money? If I get caught up on, what about the electricity? What about this? What about that? Like, how would I get anything done? Try leave the house without your phone for a month. And look at how many changes you're going to have to make. Or just say, okay, I'm not using internet banking. How do you approve a transaction? You go to pay for something with your card and it requires you to approve it. Or you want to send someone money, or you want to check your bank balance. You have to call them. Like, you have to go through an automated phone system. You will be able to avoid using AI. It's just going to be massively inconvenient. And because of the ways that people are using it today, you're going to also be disadvantaged. And that doesn't mean AI can replace you and that you should stop thinking. It means that you should start thinking differently, because now you're in a world where there's a different kind of infrastructure. Okay, if I was to sit here and say, no, I'm not using AI because it uses too much water, or I don't agree with the data centers, what can I do? Because the people who I'm playing against, they aren't playing by those rules. It's the same thing as regulatory capture, but now I've got to play by different rules. but all these other guys get to play by these other rules. I can't compete properly. I need to use this tool to retire myself before it replaces all the jobs. Let's just turn off this traffic light because they use electricity. Oh, but we need them for safety. Okay, you're going to need fucking AI. The same way you need a phone, the same way you need internet banking, because the entire economy and the entire infrastructure is going to be built around it. We're getting locked into a grid. You either learn how to navigate it or you just get locked into it. And I am much more of the opinion that I want to learn how to navigate this system well for my own benefit and get in and get out. And then people were talking about what are the security implications of it, and it's like, mate, nothing you put in this device is secure anyway. How secure is it? Well, it depends who wants access to it. Like, you know, that guy's on the next motorbike's phone is probably secure from me, but it depends what information he's got in there. So security is more like a spectrum rather than is it secure. And then again, it really depends on who wants it. I have an optimistic view about how to use it, but I am definitely not optimistic about what they're going to use it for against us. Because the way that people share information about themselves with AI, right? If you think that's not going to be used against you in some way or used to market against you, it's the same way that your behavior and interactions on social media train an algorithm to be able to get you to use it more. It's as simple as that. Are they going to fundamentally change the way that they drive engagement and usage of their product? Probably not. If anything, it's going to get worse. So seeing it for what it is and what it's clearly becoming in terms of an infrastructure layer that connects to everything, that becomes the way that we interact with everything, the same way the internet is the way that we interact with everything. That's what it's becoming. I am not going to have an impact on anything to do with data centers and water, right? Or electricity. That's someone else's job. And the only incentive they're going to have for that is, again, the same shit. It's big corporation stuff, it's regulatory capture, and it's making money. Like, we haven't gone to another planet. So I want to get excited about what AI is going to be good for, right? We can go into the doom and gloom, and you can be doom and gloom about everything. I do genuinely think, though, that this is going to be used in every possible way to centralize existing power further. It's just naturally going to happen that way. That's the way it always goes. I also think it increases the leverage of a human. A human plus AI is going to have more leverage than a human without AI. The same way that a human plus the internet, or a human plus technology, or a human plus permissionless leverage has a higher output potential than one that doesn't have that. This is the new tool, and you should be learning how to use it. What I'm actually saying is, stop using the fucking ChatGPT website, right? Connect this thing up to your files, give it tools, make it do something useful, figure out how it can be useful for you. If you don't know how to code, don't try and start making fucking websites with this. You can make websites with it, but you can also do the thing that you already know how to do, except you can probably do it better, cheaper, faster, and you can learn in a better way, I think, purely because you get feedback that you understand. Right? If I'm an architect and I try and use this to design a house, I can instantly say, that's good, that's not good. And this is what I think people miss. There are so many things that people have seen it done badly once, or have seen a pattern of something being done badly, and they say that doesn't work. People try to put £50 on ads or $100 into Facebook ads. They don't get any customers, and they're like, Facebook ads don't work. And then you've got like Alex Hormozzi's companies putting hundreds of thousands of dollars a day into ads. It's not it can't do it, it's you don't know how to do it. Because it can do loads of different things. And if it can't do it yet, you can probably be the one that makes it be able to do that thing. And this is where we're at. If you think of things that are possible, your mind is opened. If you think of things that are impossible, your mind closes, right? If you say, no, that's impossible, why are you going to think of solutions? But if you even have that inkling or that suggestion or that spark that, I reckon I could do this thing. You know, like I made something the other day with Claude Code using Remotion. I can upload a video of me talking. It transcribes it using a local AI model. on my MacBook, so it doesn't need the internet. It figures out all the filler words, the ums and the likes, and then it edits them out of the video. It doesn't need an internet connection. It has a web dashboard. You can preview it. You can add custom graphics using Remotion. That bit requires internet because it uses an LLM to do that part. I didn't know how to do that. I just wanted to see how it worked. How do I actually connect these parts? What are the limitations of it? The other day, someone asked me how they can start learning JavaScript to make websites. And I said, just ask Claude. And he was like, nah, seriously. And I said, yeah, seriously, just ask Claude. And he thought I was trying to brush off the question and not answer it and not help him. And I said, no, I'm being genuinely serious. You need to just ask Claude. Because Claude will give you a better answer than I will. I'm not saying ask Claude so that I don't have to. I'm saying ask Claude because Claude will tell you way better than I will. Now, that's not always the case if you know how to ask the questions and call it out on its BS, because it will try and BS you. But if you know where to call it out and where to say, actually, that's not that practical. Like, for example, if you upload a screenshot of a chess game and you say, what's the next best move? In ChatGPT today, right, on the top model, you put that in ChatGPT, it will tell you the next best move, but with no understanding of like the possible moves that your opponent might do, right? It doesn't do that part for you. So for example, it will tell you to take a piece, but then it opens up your queen to get attacked, you know, and it's like, okay, so that's not the best move, is it? Because you've made me just lose my queen. And this is very similar to the pattern of what using ChatGPT is like, and same with Claude really, but it just makes stupid mistakes. And if you don't know to say, yeah, hold on a sec, what are you actually saying here? Like, what do you actually mean here? Or why are you getting caught up on this one point? Why are you saying this? It was talking to me about something to do with travel planning, and it started framing everything as if I was on like a really tight budget. And I was like, I haven't said anything to you about being on a tight budget. Can you stop framing everything from that perspective? Because like, that's not what I'm looking for here. And it's like, oh yeah, sorry about that. And then it gives me much better answers. So knowing where to push back and where to say, what are you saying here, completely changes the output of it. So if I said, teach me how to code, where I know about coding, I would know what would be a bad suggestion. And this is where people want to use it for new things, but really using it for things you already know is going to be the fastest proper 0 to 1. One major thing that I've learned recently around AI tools is we use MCPs for situations where we want to connect Claude to an external tool. For example, I connect it to my task list, which uses an app called Todoist. Okay, so I go in there and I can say to Claude, what's on my task list? Or I can voice dump, brain dump a load of stuff on a voice note and say, I need to do this, I need to do that, I'm not sure about doing this thing. And it can take all of those actions for me. So it can actually just do all of those tasks. And this is where that's useful. But then I also use that app, I have that app here on my phone. So I can interact with the app either in the interface or through Claude. So for example, if I wanted to have a project which had other team members, then using something like Todoist, rather than a list, on a local file on my computer or something which only Claude knows from its memory of me, it's interacting with a tool which natively has that functionality. So for example, I'm working with this guy next to me on a project. I want to tell Claude what all of his skills are versus what all of my skills are. We're going to work out the plan. And then I want it to allocate the tasks to each person based on what we're good at. I want to add due dates so that it's done in milestones. That's not something which I would even consider doing manually, but I would know what good looks like, right? I would look at it and say, yeah, that sounds right. If it started assigning tasks in a totally random fashion, the point is that working with tools which natively do what you would want them to do and integrating AI completely levels up the system. The most simple version of this is Claude Code and Obsidian for writing a journal. I can just brain dump to Claude and say, add all this to my journal, and then analyze it. And then reference any old posts and tell me any patterns here that I'm not seeing. And it just does that. It just does that for fun, you know? And sometimes it will just make things up. And I have to say, like, really often, like, what are you talking about? Why are you suggesting this? So, for example, one of the ways that I've had to improve the way it does journal analysis, I had to get it to separate its analysis from a summary of what it could observe. I wanted a clear distinction between these are the observations summarized, and this is the analysis about those observations and what it's based on, with references to other specific files, whether that's a people file where it describes my relationship to that person and notes about them, and also whether that's something in my CRM or a task. Like, I want reference. I don't want it to do analysis unless it's based on something, because it would just make things up and say them really confidently, but they're completely false. If you're prepared to wade through that to get to good value and useful information, then you can do it. The way I think of this shared access is the tools which share human interaction and AI interaction. So I was trying to design a solution for a company who has a distributed team to be able to use a knowledge base that could be used across multiple users in Claude, you know, with their own accounts and potentially different access levels. For example, one does customer support, one does marketing, and having access to the different relevant context. And I'm used to working with Obsidian. And I actually switched to Obsidian from Notion just purely because at the time, Obsidian was what people were using to work with Claude Code. But actually, Notion works pretty well with Claude Code. And the problem I've got with Obsidian is that I have to use something called sync thing to synchronize it between my devices. So I've got it on a VPS, my MacBook, and my phone. You know, it's a local file that actually lives on the VPS. The source is on the VPS, and then that's synchronized to the phone and laptop. But with Notion, you don't have to do that. It has a good interface with Notion. It can do everything. Read, write databases, make pages, make child pages, add different properties to databases. I think at the moment it can't delete pages. Possibly the API doesn't let you delete pages. I'm not 100% sure, but it can do basically everything you would need it to do. And the benefit as well is that you don't have to manage that, right? It just synchronizes everywhere. If you have people connected to certain pages as a team, they have access to that through their own Notion account. That's great. If you were going to try and do that with Obsidian and have local files and everything like that, then that's a completely different story. It's not something that I would expect people to want to maintain. That's just overhead. So having a system where humans can use Notion and write to Notion and find things easily in Notion, and it looks nicer than Markdown. So there's less, you know, Markdown is for developers. Let's face it. Like, people who aren't developers don't really use, like, when do you interact with Markdown? Unless you're working on software. You just probably don't. At least not in the traditional way of like having an IDE open, like VS Code, and then like actually making .md files. Whereas Notion is just a much more familiar interface, and it's going to be a tool that people would actually use. The problem with something that relied on a lot of Markdown files or needed a lot of maintenance, people might stop using that after a couple of weeks. And the other thing I liked about Notion is that you can structure the information in a way that makes it more queryable for Claude. So, for example, the case that this was for, their team was using Google Drive, but all of the data was super unstructured. Converting some of the high signal information, for example, the SOPs, the supplier list, the team information, what each person works on, converting all of that into simple Notion databases, it opens up a lot of capabilities, because now Claude can reference that information, it can search that information. I'm dealing with this case, what should I do? Okay, this is what it says in the SOPs. All right, when was the SOPs last updated? And then having a date property in the database. Oh, this hasn't been updated for 3 years. Okay, can we have a look at all of the SOPs that haven't been updated in the last 2 years and just make sure that they're still relevant? Is there any stale information? Is there anything conflicting? That's something you would have to look at manually. Like, I started watching a series last night. I think it's called Criminal something on Apple TV. The premise was that they'd had a phone call from someone who said that her boyfriend murdered his ex-girlfriend and someone else was doing the time for it in jail. And the detective's method of looking that up was to print out a list of everyone who was in a certain prison and then was circling all of the ones which it said were done for murder. Then she had to manually check those names and see how long the sentence was, because they knew it was 24 years. And I was just like, I'm not even fucking watching this. There's no way that that's what the system looks like. And so we now basically have semantic search of our own custom knowledge bases. The same way which you had this like Google brain effect, where people forgot information but they remembered how to find it. Like in my video I was editing earlier, I was talking about these trees in Southampton, and they're like 70 years old, and I 170 years old, and I didn't know the exact number, but I remembered how I found it before. We still have this, and like there's a lot of information. I don't know some of the file structure in my Obsidian, for example the CRM. I've never had to open a file manually. Claude knows how to open the files manually. You can basically create that for yourself. What I suggest is taking the highest signal information, the stuff which is actually going to be useful, because there's no point in copying someone else's system. You have to find information which is useful to you, structure it in a way that Claude can use it, structure it in a tool which your team can access it, that they're actually going to use. And then when you combine those things, if your team is using it, they're updating tasks, or they're in Asana, they're updating, then Claude is getting new context as well. So the team's work lives in the app, like Notion or Todoist or Asana, but now your Claude can still query and get the most up-to-date information. So when you say, hey, what tasks are left to do on this product launch, it can find that out. Whereas if you ask your team to start using pieces of software they've never used before, or interacting with types of files that they don't even have a program on their computer to open or edit, then they're not going to use it. And you're going to set something up that's going to just be a waste of time. And this has really changed the way that I look at MCP. MCP, for it to be useful to Claude, it has to be something I actually use. So that Claude is getting new information that's actually useful, that does something valuable. Some of the next videos I'm going to make are around AI readiness, preparing yourself and setting up your knowledge base and setting up your structure so that you can interact with AI in the most meaningful way for your projects, your life, your planning, your business, your team. So I'll be going much more in depth about this. If you enjoy this video, let me know. If you've got any questions, drop me a comment. See you soon.